In 1933, the Tennessee Valley was one of the poorest regions in America. Floods could wipe out an entire farming season in a week. In most of the valley, there was no electricity at all. Today, the same region is home to Ford's largest manufacturing investment ever built, Volkswagen's only American assembly plant, and one of the fastest growing economies in the country. The geography never changed. So what did? The Tennessee River drains 40,000 square miles across 7 states. It gets some of the heaviest rainfall in the eastern United States, which sounds like an advantage. For most of the valley's history, it wasn't. The river flooded constantly. Crops disappeared overnight. Entire farming seasons could be wiped out in a matter of days. After heavy rain upstream, families could go to sleep with dry fields and wake up to muddy water pushing through their homes. And the geography made the problem worse. The Cumberland Plateau boxed the valley in from the west. Appalachian ridges ran along the east. There were no easy passes through either one. Getting goods to market meant fighting terrain that was difficult to cross. The valley had coal and timber. It had rich floodplain farmland along the Tennessee River. But for decades, outside investors mostly came in to extract resources and leave. Wealth flowed out of the region far more easily than roads or railroads flowed into it. By 1930, the Tennessee Valley had spent a century sitting on major natural resources with almost nothing to show for it. The geography that should have made the region rich had, in practice, kept it poor. This is what makes the Tennessee Valley so interesting. The resources were already there. The geography wasn't missing anything obvious. The question is why none of it translated into prosperity. On May 18, 1933, Franklin Roosevelt signed the Tennessee Valley Authority Act. The goals were enormous: control flooding, generate electricity, improve farming, and turn the Tennessee River into a navigable commercial waterway, all across a 7-state region. Roosevelt wasn't trying to fix small problems. He wanted to rebuild the entire region from the river outward. Norris Dam, the first major TVA project, was completed in 1936. Over the next few decades, the TVA would build 29 major dams across the Tennessee River system. And almost immediately, the economics of the valley began to change. In 1933, fewer than 3% of farms in the Tennessee Valley had electricity. By the end of World War II, most of them did. That changed life in obvious ways: lights, refrigeration, electric machinery, but it also changed what kind of economy the valley could support. The key geographic fact was this: the same rivers that had flooded and isolated the region turned out to be almost perfect for hydroelectric power. The Tennessee River system had everything dam builders wanted: heavy rainfall, steep elevation changes, and a massive drainage basin constantly feeding water into the system. For 150 years, the river had worked against the valley. Now it was working for it. Aluminum production requires enormous amounts of electricity, more than almost any other major industry at the time. Alcoa had already been operating in Tennessee for decades, but TVA Power changed the scale completely. Suddenly, the valley had some of the cheapest industrial electricity in the country. And then, the Second World War began. In 1942, the Army Corps of Engineers started building a secret city in the hills outside Knoxville. They bought thousands of acres of farmland, displaced entire communities, and built roads, homes, factories, and schools, almost overnight. The city was called Oak Ridge. Most of the people living there had no idea what they were helping build. And this is where the story gets strange. The infrastructure project Roosevelt started less than a decade earlier had accidentally created one of the few places in America capable of supporting what came next. Within just a few years, Oak Ridge had grown to roughly 75,000 residents and was consuming staggering amounts of electricity, more than some small states at the time. Oak Ridge became one of the main sites of the Manhattan Project. The enriched uranium used in the Hiroshima bomb was produced there. And it was built in Tennessee for one overwhelming reason: power. Enriching uranium required an enormous, constant supply of electricity, and the TVA's dam network was one of the only systems in the country capable of delivering it at that scale. The same river system that had isolated the valley for generations was now powering one of the most important military projects in human history. And after the war ended, the industrial ecosystem stayed behind. Chemical plants, textile mills, auto suppliers, all pulled in by electricity prices that remained among the lowest in the country. At the same time, the TVA transformed the Tennessee River into a navigable shipping corridor. For the first time, freight could move reliably through the interior of the Southeast and out toward the Gulf. The river that had once trapped the valley inside its geography was now connecting it to the rest of the country. The remarkable thing about the TVA isn't that it transformed the valley once. It's that the advantages kept compounding. Cheap, reliable electricity never stopped mattering. Every few decades, a different industry showed up and rediscovered why the Tennessee Valley worked. In the 1980s, it was automobiles. Nissan opened a major plant in Smyrna. Volkswagen followed in Chattanooga. Both were drawn by a familiar combination: affordable power, access to transportation networks, and a location within easy reach of much of the American market. But the factories mattered for another reason. Once they arrived, suppliers followed. Workers gained specialized skills. Training programs expanded. The region became better at making things. That made the next investment easier, and then the next one. Today, the same pattern is playing out with electric vehicles. Ford's Blue Oval City project outside Memphis is one of the largest manufacturing investments in the history of the American South. And once again, cheap industrial-scale electricity is part of the equation. The same thing is happening with data centers. They need huge amounts of power, reliable infrastructure, and room to expand. Tennessee already has all three. That's why companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have continued investing in major facilities across the state. The industries keep changing. The underlying advantage doesn't. Every investment leaves something behind: workers, suppliers, infrastructure, expertise. The next company arrives and finds a stronger foundation than the one before it. The first domino fell in 1933. The chain reaction is still going. What's remarkable isn't that the TVA worked. It's that 90 years later, we're still watching the consequences play out. Go back to 1933. The Tennessee Valley was one of the poorest regions in the United States. It flooded regularly. Much of it had no electricity. For generations, the geography had acted more like a barrier than an advantage. But the geography was never the whole story. Roosevelt looked at the same river system that had held the region back and saw something else: a source of power. The dams controlled the floods. The electricity attracted industry. The river became a transportation corridor. One decision changed how the valley interacted with its own geography. And the effects never really stopped. Oak Ridge ran on it in the 1940s. Nissan ran on it in the 1980s. Ford is running on it today. The companies changed, the technology changed. The advantage stayed remarkably similar. That's what makes geography so powerful. Not because it determines what happens, because it shapes what becomes possible. The Tennessee Valley had the same rivers, the same mountains, and the same natural resources it always had. What changed was the infrastructure built around them. If you want to see what happened in the neighboring mountains where the transformation never arrived at the same scale, the Appalachia video is linked above. The world has a structure. Let's keep finding it.